Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and it's going to be another wonderful episode today. We have a ton to get to, but hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. I'm loving this nice, warm spring weather we've been having. It's very odd that it's this warm, this semi-early on in spring. I know now we're in April, but usually still in Pittsburgh, if it's in April, it's usually still pretty cold. There's usually still snow, and we haven't had much snow in the spring, so that is nice. We did have, again, only one snow day, I would say, a few weeks ago, and then it was 60 degrees 2 days later, so very typical Pittsburgh weather. But nonetheless, it's good to have some warm weather, and I'm hoping to get myself out to the ballpark sooner rather than later to catch some action. I'm glad there is somewhat of a capacity allowed at the stadium, so it'll be nice to get back to the ballpark since we weren't able to do that last year. But let's get into the show for today. A lot of things to discuss. Really excited with the first start of the first couple games of the season, first couple weeks, if you will, of the season, and just kind of what's been going on in the MLB. But I'll get into, in the first segment, any and all of the news going around the league, touch on a couple potential injuries we might have and some players that might be out for a little bit. And then in segment 2, I'll get into discussing which players have jumped out early on and have been off to some very strong starts early on in the season. Afterwards, I'll get into a little milestone tracker and share what milestones players are on the verge of surpassing that we should be on the lookout for. And then make sure you stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into which teams that are projected to finish in second or third in their divisions could actually win the division this year. So we've got a lot to discuss, a lot of fun things going on. But I want to first get into kind of what's been going on with Shohei Ohtani. I mean, because he's been up to, I think, a lot of really big things. I think he's going to slowly but surely find himself into a category of his own. And I'll get into what's been going on, but he's going to be one of the major headlines this entire season, I would say. But he also showed on Sunday against the White Sox his capabilities and what he's capable of doing as a player. Let's face it, right? Ohtani, this is also very interesting. Ohtani is the first player since 1903 to start a game pitching and then also to hit second in the lineup. And it definitely seemed to work. I mean, he came out throwing 100, 101 consistently. And not to mention, he went into about the 5th, 6th inning against the White Sox, and he was still pumping 100 miles an hour, 98 miles an hour consistently into the 3rd and 4th inning. And that velocity never dipped down, which is usually a really good sign for somebody that, again, he's coming off of, elbow surgery a couple years ago, did not have a great year last year, and having this kind of rejuvenating start, if you will, I think it's a really good sign for him. And not to mention, the next inning, after he's throwing 101, he belts a 451-foot bomb and sends it into the upper deck. I mean, it was insane to watch him play. He's really, he's got a great swing. He's a very talented player. He's got a great fastball. He loves to pair his fastball with a little splitter, and the splitter's like 90, 92 miles an hour, and it just dips down and dives, and it's pretty hard to hit. So, he's somebody that, quite frankly, he could revolutionize the way baseball is. And I know that sounds very odd to say, but let's face it. When have we ever seen a player that has been this big of a dual threat in the sport, where he's able to pitch at a high level, but also hit at a high level? We have seen him, I think, hit more than we've seen him pitch, and the hitting has been impressive for the majority of his career, I would say. Again, he's only played about 2 or 3 years, so he's still pretty new into the league. But we've seen now the capabilities he possesses from the mound, and being able to do both, that's going to completely change, I think, how pitchers are going to start preparing for at-bats, how they're going to start viewing hitting as a pitcher. We might start seeing, after Shohei Ohtani, we might start seeing a trend of really good hitting pitchers that ultimately force managers to put the pitchers into the lineup. And it does kind of make me wonder, if that does happen down the road, what is that going to do to the DH, right? Is that going to affect things with the DH? Is that going to throw some things off for the universal DH? I don't know. We'll have to see, because, again, if Ohtani, let's face it, if Ohtani is going to be able to come off the mound, go to the plate, and hit, other pitchers and other players are going to start taking note of that, and guys that are going to be coming up through the league and so on and so forth, and younger players that are going to be watching Ohtani and idolizing Ohtani, they're going to want to do the same thing. So we might down the road, again, maybe 10, 15 years from now, the next generation of players, if you will, we might start seeing a trend of really powerful hitting pitchers that, again, force managers to put them into the lineup. It could do a couple things to the DH. It could maybe make managers force some instances where their rosters are having to be reconfigured a little bit, and you're going to have a pitcher somewhere in there and maybe take the DH out. Who knows? But I think that his ability to do both is going to be revolutionary. I mean, there's not many players, if any, that can really, again, go up to the plate and go on the mound and instill fear in both pitchers and hitters. There's not many players that do that. And the one thing I do worry, though, is with him, again, with him being able to hit, with him being able to be in the lineup potentially every single day, I do worry that it's going to start to wear on him, right? He's going to start hitting every day, and then every fifth day he's going to go out and pitch. I am concerned that he's going to start getting worn down. There might be some stress injuries as time goes on, and he might start to really maybe struggle, or he might run into injury problems earlier on than people would want him to, or to ever want him to, right? And I think that, again, he's coming off an elbow surgery not too long ago. He could be injury prone, but not to mention, here's the big thing, they were mentioning it on the broadcast, he has thrown better since this elbow surgery. His throwing is actually a lot better than it was before his elbow surgery. So maybe this is kind of an instance where you've heard about players that go and get a surgery and they come back and they're actually better after the fact. I know that's not a very consistent theme, because for the most part, you're coming off a surgery, you're probably going to struggle. That's not the case for Ohtani. And I think that's what's going to be the difference with him, is that he's going to be able to rise above that, and he's already shown that. And I'm really, really impressed with Ohtani early on. I'm really excited to see what kind of the future holds for him, because I definitely do think he could change the way baseball is as a game. I think he could change the pitching position overall. He could really revolutionize baseball. He really, really could. But I want to now get into our first bench-clearing brawl that we had not too long ago. I know it's very early on in the season, but the tension is still very high, and tempers are starting to flare. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, especially with COVID going on. I know that we all do like to see a bench-clearing brawl every now and again. I personally do. I think it's exciting. I know you don't want to get anybody injured, but it's just the pure competitiveness of the sport and of the players and of the managers and coaches. And so it makes things kind of interesting to watch, in my personal opinion. So what happened was, this was the Reds and Cardinals game. Castellanos gets plunked with a ball, and he's not too happy about it. He didn't come towards the mound. He didn't charge at the mound or anything. Yadier Molina kind of stood there and just patted him on the back, said, "Hey, it's all good. Don't worry about it. That was not, there was no intention behind that at all." So fast forward probably about 2 or 3 batters later, and Castellanos comes around and scores. And the pitcher that hit him comes to cover home plate because it was a passed ball. And so Yadier Molina gets up and tries to get it back, and Castellanos slides in. He's safe. And he gets up, and he starts yelling at the pitcher, "Let's go, let's, whatever." And the pitcher kind of looked at him and then got up, and then he starts going towards him. And then Yadier Molina comes storming towards him. Nolan Arenado comes running out of the bench, out of the dugout, and then all of a sudden you see Paul Goldschmidt, and you just see this sea of Cardinals players. And then all of a sudden, everybody from the Reds bench just completely clears also, and they all kind of mesh together right around home plate, right behind the backstop kind of, and it was absolute mayhem that ensued. I mean, it was pretty wild. Castellanos wound up getting a 2-game suspension. The pitcher, he didn't get anything, though. I was kind of shocked by that. But Castellanos did get 2-game suspension. I do see why. But here's kind of the issue, right, that I am a little bit concerned about, is what happens if you have an instance like this where there's a big melee, there's a huge brawl on the field, and both benches clear, 2 teams come running up to each other, and one of them has COVID. And then all of a sudden it gets spread around. And then now you not only have one team that's going to get it, you're going to have another team that gets it. And then those 2 teams are going to go and play 2 other teams, and then those 2 teams are going to get contact tracing. And as a result, it could turn this thing into a snowball effect. Now, again, knock on wood, thankfully there haven't been any instances of COVID on either team yet. So as a result, it's okay. It's not a big issue right now. And I know that they're tested so often that there's probably a very small percentage of that happening. But still, with the uncertainty of what COVID is and how it can be contracted and what the duration of time in which you can get it and so on and so forth, that could play a factor into, hey, yeah, some guy tests negative on a Tuesday. They have a bench-clearing brawl on a Friday, but on Wednesday and Thursday, maybe he starts showing symptoms and it's nothing serious. They have that bench-clearing brawl on Friday. He tests positive on Saturday. All of a sudden, everybody panics. And so I think the MLB, the reason why he's getting a 2-game suspension for that, again, something that probably would have just issued a fine in normal terms or in normal times, but because I think of the health factor and the health risk that there is and the potential jeopardizing of people's health when you've got two teams that are coming together that, again, neither team knows where the other one has been, really, right? I mean, you probably can guess that they've been in other cities playing other teams. You know that, but you don't know what they've been doing. And, again, what's making this very hard for some players, I think, or at least it would be hard for me, is that the rules are different for each state in terms of what's open and what's not. And so it's hard to tell a player, someone that's a grown man, that's somebody that is getting paid an astronomical amount of money to play baseball, hey, you can't leave this hotel even though the state requirements are somewhat lifted and you're allowed to go out and about and do your own thing. That's really hard to tell somebody. And I'm not saying that anybody has stepped out of line or has crossed the guidelines. I'm just saying there are instances like that because we saw it last year. We saw perfect examples of it last year. Again, we saw Zach Plesac and Mike Clevenger going out in Chicago. We saw an instance where, I can't remember which team it was. It might have been the Marlins or it might have been the Cardinals, but they went to a casino. There's instances like that. There's issues that arise like that. And again, with COVID, you kind of have to brace for impact every single day. I mean, hey, I look at it this way. My other job is being a PA and a play-by-play announcer. Every single day there's a game, I kind of brace myself by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon that game might get canceled. And players have to, again, be very weary of that and very aware of that, hey, something could happen, something could change, and we have to be very aware of that. And so I think the MLB is having to hand out certain types of punishments in order to keep up with those guidelines and keep up with this kind of overall theme of we've got to keep everyone healthy, and we really mean it when we say we want to minimize the amount of contact. Now, I will say, with the vaccines coming in and with it continuing to get rolled out, we might start seeing a levying of some of these guidelines, a slow but surely kind of alleviating of some of these rules and restrictions. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but I could definitely see it eventually, and I don't think it's going to be a complete, full 100% everything is hunky-dory. I think that it's going to be a very slow progression, and then maybe next season things will be completely back to normal, or the season after. Who knows? But all I know is that the MLB just has to be very mindful of that, and teams have to be especially mindful of that. But it was still, again, kind of exciting to see an early season bench-clearing brawl. That's always something to really kind of get you riled up and excited. But I want to now get into, again, I've been really touching on a lot of rule changes on the episodes I've been doing, and the reason being is because there's, again, so much talk of all these rules that are going to potentially be changed or they're already being put into place in the minor league. And one of these is actually this new rule that's going to start to try and reduce and really limit the amount of opportunities players will have to cheat during games and to illegally sign steal during games. And this goes back to with the Astros and everything that went on there. And they're trying to, again, cut down on that, to minimize that, or try to completely eliminate that. And so what the MLB has started doing is they're implementing more rules to try and obliterate any of these instances of sign stealing, electronically or whatever. So they're going to start having more security guards kind of roaming the ballpark, one in each dugout and one just kind of roaming around. And then not to mention, the MLB last year completely did away with TV broadcasts, live TV broadcasts, because that's how the Astros were doing it. Now, they were doing it in a little bit more of an elaborate way, but they were using live stream TV broadcasts to catch the catcher's signs and then relay it in real time. And so that was the issue. So last year, the MLB completely got rid of any sort of TV broadcast. They didn't allow any live game feed in the dugout. Players wound up complaining because nowadays players are able to see kind of their live swings, and they can go back and, they can get kind of, a film, if you will, in-game film, and see what they're doing wrong and what they need to change. And so the MLB allowed only 3 TVs with the telecast of the game, but it was on a 15-second delay. So as a result, you couldn't really pick up on what was going on. And not to mention, the video was edited. The video feed was edited so it would take out the catcher showing the sign, so it would just show simply the at-bat. And so this year, teams are going to actually have, for the first time, legitimate access to same game, because again, last year it was they couldn't have the feed to the same game. They couldn't have the live feed to the same game. This year they can have the same game live feed to rewatch at-bats, but again, there's going to be a little bit of a delay, and it's only going to show, and the MLB has been able to figure out how to configure this. I don't know how. They hired some tech company and they hired some other outside consultants to try and figure this out. So pretty much all these teams are going to be issued, I believe it's either 15 or 19 iPads in each team's dugout, and they're all MLB issued, and there's not going to allow them to be able to go on social media, surf the web. It is completely and utterly controlled by the MLB to simply show at-bats for hitters, and they're not going to show any signs of the catchers. It's already programmed to edit that out, and so it's just going to show the at-bat, and that's it, just the swing and nothing else. And I think that is actually a very interesting thing, right? I mean, there's obviously going to be instances, and we've already seen it, where teams are trying to get creative, and we might start seeing it again. You know, teams are going to get creative with how they can maybe figure out a way to sign steal and use this in their advantage, but the MLB is really cracking down hard on this. And this year, they're increasing the number of TVs in the dugout from 3 from last year to 8 because, again, the MLB doesn't want players to crowd around because of COVID. So there is that kind of COVID aspect in it. But all in all, I mean, I think that this is going to be an ongoing issue with baseball. With just the rapid development of technology and just the numerous kinds of ways in which players and teams can get creative in how they go about sign stealing, that's what's going to be, I think, the real challenge is really trying to weed it completely out. I think that the Astros have opened up Pandora's box, and I don't think it's going to get closed. I think the MLB is going to do everything they can to get it closed, but I think, again, maybe a couple years down the road, we hear another instance of sign stealing and another cheating scandal where a team was able to rewire something and they were able to unedit who knows, right? I mean, hey, anything is possible in this day and age. So I would not be shocked. But at the same time, I think that it's a really good sign by the MLB that they're taking this issue, you know, head on, and they're really trying to eliminate it and get rid of it and not have it around because, quite frankly, again, it is detrimental to baseball when you've got teams that are illegally sign stealing. And I get that sign stealing is part of baseball, right? I mean, if you're on the base path and you're being creative and you're picking up on stuff like that, I get that's part of the game. But if you're using outside forces, again, it's like steroids. You're using an outside substance in order to better progress yourself or your team skill-wise or performance-wise. And as a result, that is not allowed. That is called cheating. And so the MLB going ahead and issuing this and really cracking down on that, I think that's very important. I believe they're also going to start using outside tech companies to maybe even try and monitor like in-game feed and seeing what teams are doing and if any team is doing something that they should not be doing. So that's, again, another interesting aspect of it. But I just feel like there's going to be other intricate ways in which players and teams figure out how to sign steal and players start getting creative. At the same time, though, there's going to be a heightened awareness of that. So as a result, now we've all been put on notice for this. The MLB has been put on notice for this. Now it's kind of a matter of, okay, now we have to be aware of it, we have to pay attention to it, and we have to have our guard up, because before we didn't really have to worry about that because we weren't aware that it was going on. Now we know that it goes on. Now we know that it's happened under our watch and under our nose. We need to do something about it because people are going to be very angry about that, and we've seen it already. I mean, the Astros are continuing to pay for they're still suffering consequences, right? They're paying for their actions still. I was watching the Astros-A's game the other day, and Carlos Correa got hit, and the entire stadium filled with Oakland Athletics fans went nuts. They were ecstatic that he got hit. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't think you should cheer when somebody is injured or gets hit or whatever. I don't think that's right. But when you're the Astros, and I hate to say this, but when you do something like that, and think about all of the different teams that they cheated against, all the different players, right? I mean, I can't remember the pitcher's name, but there's a pitcher, in his case, actually just got thrown out. He went and sued the Astros for wrongful termination or cause of wrongful termination because he cited that his performance against the Astros when they were in the sign-stealing age was the reason why he was without a job and he lost his pitching job. And again, you're starting to continue to see it, and I think other teams are aware of it, and they're saying like, hey, these teams, they suffered the consequences, and it's really, really bad. It is not good at all, and we need to do something about it before it gets out of hand. I mean, again, people went into last year saying they're going to get headhunted. They're going to be targeted as a team, and teams are and you do sometimes see it. You do see some pitchers start to throw a little high and tight on them. You start to see them kind of throw some chin music towards them and really trying to back them off the plate, let them know that they're there. It's, again, an intimidation thing saying, hey, I didn't like what you did. I'm going to let you know about it, and I'm the one that's in control right now because I'm the one throwing the ball at you. And, I mean, there were instances last year where players did get plunked, and I do wonder, okay, this is, again, a very kind of very, very far-off thought, but I do wonder if there are some players on the Astros, like George Springer, who maybe said, I'm going to remove myself from this. I don't want to be around this anymore. I don't want to be associated with it anymore. And I've already noticed kind of a better reception of George Springer since he left the Astros. I have noticed, I think, an increase in perception, positive perception, in George Springer. Now that he's not with the Astros, I think that just kind of muddles everything, and it kind of just is this big gray cloud that hangs over Houston right now. And so as a result, I got to give the MLB a lot of credit for cracking down on this. And we'll see how these changes, hold up. And we'll see how they're going to be able to limit and really, I think, eliminate all potential of sign stealing and cheating. So we'll have to see. But again, it's going to be, I think, very interesting in the future. So, folks, that's going to do it for us in our first segment, but don't go anywhere because when I get back from the commercial break, I'll get into which players have stood out to me the most early on from the season and who I think could continue to play this well moving forward into the year. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I got right into any and all of the latest news going around the MLB and discussing some of the latest headlines from the MLB world. But make sure you stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into which teams that are projected to finish in second or even lower in their respective divisions that could actually finish higher and even potentially win their divisions this season. But I want to now get into which players have really jumped out to me early on and who has been playing particularly well in the first week and a half or week and some change of the season, I'd have to say. There's been a lot of players that have really jumped out early on. And the first one I have to give some credit to, and somebody that I've quite frankly, from the team that he used to come from, again, I did not really expect a whole lot from him being on this new team. Michael A. Taylor. Michael A. Taylor coming from the Nationals. I mean, we always kind of joked back in D.C. his name was Michael K. Taylor because he usually just struck out. But after first couple games through the season, I mean, he's off to a really, really strong start. I mean, a really strong start. Only through 4 games, but he's had 16 at-bats in those 4 games, batting .438 with 2 homers and 6 RBIs with a 1,300-plus OPS. So 1.346 OPS. So he's off to a really strong start, and that Royals team is very interesting. Very, very interesting. I mean, they first off, they impressed me from day one, mainly because they were able to put up so many runs on opening day, but also that they've been this consistent with how they've been playing. I mean, they've been off to a very, very strong start early on in the season, 3-1 to begin the year. And I mean, I know that I had mentioned them kind of going into the year saying, oh, well, I think they're going to be pretty good. I did not expect them to be actually this good. I thought that they would be good. They would show signs of the future, but I didn't expect them to be this good. And I got to give a lot of credit to Michael A. Taylor. He's been off to a really, really strong start, so he stuck out to me early on. But here's another player that has stuck out to me, Yerman Mercedes. He's been off to an incredible start for the White Sox. Batting .667, was just named the AL Player of the Week. And, I mean, he's got a 1.684 OPS. He's got a home run, 6 RBIs, 28 years old. And, I mean, the guy is really, I think, put himself on the map. And especially with Eloy Jimenez being injured for who knows how long. Again, I think it was about 5 to 6 months. So he'll probably be back around August, September time. Having somebody like Mercedes step up like that and perform well, that's huge. That is every bit of important as having somebody that just kind of is consistent day in and day out but doesn't necessarily put up those same numbers. I mean, he has been able to fill a void with having Eloy Jimenez gone, and I think that's very, very important to have. Very important. And here's something that's very interesting also is that Jacob deGrom is way up there in batting this year. He's actually only 3 at-bats, but he's batting .667 with a 1.333 OPS. So I'm sure that will change, and I hate to say that, but I don't expect that to stick around for very long, again, because he's a pitcher. But I will say, off to his pretty solid start, he's only pitched in 1 game this year. He went 6 innings strong, and he had 7 strikeouts. So a pretty solid outing that he had in that 1 game, but he's only pitched 1 game. So again, this is very early on. I know that these numbers are going to be very, very ballooned and probably a little bit disproportional throughout the rest of the year, but it's still interesting to see who's off to a really strong start. And I know I mentioned Nick Castellanos earlier on, but he's been off to a very impressive start himself, batting .533 right now, 3 home runs, 6 RBIs, a 1.922 OPS, and 15 at-bats. I know he's going to have to go through that 2-game suspension, but at the same time, hey, he might have this Reds team back where they need to be, right? I mean, this Reds team a year ago was one of the most disappointing teams in the entire MLB, mainly because of the offseason moves that they pulled last year and all of the hype that they had going into the year. I know the pandemic probably affected that a little bit, but I was talking to some friends about it the other day, and I said, listen, if we had a full 162-game season last year, I don't think that the Reds, the Brewers, or the Astros, or even the Marlins would have made the playoffs last year. I really don't believe that. I really, genuinely, in my heart, don't believe that. And that's coming from someone who is a ginormous Brewers fan. I would not have seen them perform well at all. I really would not have in later into the year, just with how badly they were playing. Now, they could have been able to turn things around, but I don't think so. But here's a player that I think is definitely going to turn things around also is J.D. Martinez. Coming off a year where he was not good at all, batted .213 in 2020, only had 7 homers, he had a .680 OPS, but through 15 at-bats this year, he's batting .533, 2 homers, 6 RBIs, 1.722 OPS, so off to a pretty solid start for J.D. Martinez. And I know that this Red Sox team has been off to a very sluggish start, right? I mean, they've been off to a really, really slow start. It's early on in the year, and we have to remember that. They're 1-3 right now, again, as of recording today on April 6th, so they could turn things around very quickly. I mean, they had a huge win over the Rays on Monday, 11-2, so that is a good sign. But at the same time, again, lots of things can change, and they're coming off a really tough year, but I definitely think that they could pick things up where, they left off back in maybe 2018 or 2019. But another player that has jumped out to me is Nate Lowe. Nate Lowe has been off to a really good start for the Rangers. I mean, this might have been one of the sneaky grabs of the entire offseason for any team, really. I mean, he's got 10 RBIs in 18 at-bats. He's got a .333 average and an .889 OPS. And he actually leads the MLB right now in RBIs. And right behind him is Whit Merrifield from the Kansas City Royals, batting .500, 3 homers. He's got a 1.625 OPS. He's been off to a really strong start. So, again, teams to really watch maybe might be teams like the Royals. Maybe not so much the Rangers, but maybe the Royals. That's a really good sign for, if you're a Royals fan, that you've got a guy like Whit Merrifield kind of carrying the brunt of the load, if you will, and then you've got other supporting cast pieces like Michael A. Taylor, and then you also have Carlos Santana, who hasn't been hitting incredible, but again, it's early on in the year. Now, getting into some pitchers that have been off to some really strong starts and have really been playing well, I got to say, the Phillies as a whole, they've looked really impressive, and I think a lot of it comes from their bullpen. And I have to give a lot of credit to somebody like Jose Alvarado. He's been really good. I mean, he's been pretty solid. I know his whip's a little high, 1.67, so hasn't been great with keeping guys off base. But in the 3 innings he's pitched, he's got a 1-0 record, a 3 ERA, he's got 7 Ks. And I think that he can be a vital piece to this bullpen, especially with how bad they were a year ago. They were literally one of the worst bullpens in baseball history. One of the worst. And I got to give a lot of credit to Dave Dombrowski and the entire Phillies organization, how they've been able to rebuild this team completely. And I think that it's in a really good spot. Now, getting into some pitchers that have had some high strikeout numbers, Shane Bieber is right up there. He's tied for first right now with 12 Ks, but he did not have a very good outing at all in his opening day start. That one game, he's 0-1. He's got a 4.5 ERA, 6 innings he's worked, 12 strikeouts. Again, he did become the first pitcher since Bob Feller in Indians history to record back-to-back or consecutive opening day starts with 10-plus Ks. So that is kind of a cool thing, but again, he just allowed way too many runs. He just gave up way too many runs, and the Tigers just jumped out all over him early on in that opening day matchup. Trevor Bauer's been off to a strong start for the Dodgers, too, 10 Ks. And I think they need somebody like Trevor Bauer, another just big-time strikeout guy that is going to put up really, really big numbers and really, really impressive K rates, because I think that, from a year ago, this Dodgers team, they had a lot of really good pitchers. Again, they were top tier in wins and ERA, but the strikeouts, they still needed some work on. And I think they went out and addressed that with Trevor Bauer. But my Brewers have got a really, I think, good player on their hands in Corbin Burns. He's been off to a strong start, although he is 0-1. He's got a 1.42 ERA in 6 1/3 innings, 11 Ks, 11 Ks, and a 0.16 whip. That's pretty sensational, if you ask me. He's right now 4th in the MLB in whip, and who's leading the charge is Jose Barrios. He's been off to a really strong start, much better than he was a year ago. And I remember last year, when talking about Barrios, everybody was saying how he's going to be the ace of this Twins team. He's going to be the ace. And I just didn't see it last year. He had a 5-4 record, a 4 ERA, 68 Ks in 63 innings, a 1.32 whip. But this year, he's 1-0 in his only start. He went 6 innings strong with 12 Ks and a 0 whip. He has not allowed really anybody on base at all. And so that's something to really pay attention to. And not to mention, he's got a 0 average against, too. So people can literally not hit him right now. And I think that's a good sign for this Twins team. That is, I think, secretly really good. I don't know if people really pay attention to that or are really, kind of dialed into that. But this Twins team, I think they're a lot better than what people think they are, especially me. I always kind of forget about the Twins because they're always this very stereotypical team. They start out really hot, and then come August time, somebody gets injured or somebody doesn't start playing well, and they kind of just start to plateau. And that's all that really there is to the Twins. And they get to the playoffs because of such a strong first 3-4 months. They get to the playoffs, they're burnt out, and all of a sudden they don't perform well at all. And that's happened a couple times. That has definitely happened. And so as a result, I do wonder if the Twins are going to have that longevity that they need for this season. But it's been off to a pretty solid start. I will give them that. It's been off to a solid start. But then getting in some top-tier OPS numbers, Whit Merrifield right now sitting in 6th place in the league at a 1.625. Ketel Marte for the Diamondbacks having a really good season, batting .563 with a 1.674 OPS, 2 homers, 3 RBIs. And this is a guy, and here's a very interesting tidbit. Last year, he's already tied his home run total from a year ago. He's already tied it. He had 2 home runs in 2020 and 181 at-bats. Through 16 at-bats this year, he's already got 2 home runs. So he's a player that I think has really ratcheted up a notch. And, the Diamondbacks, they're an interesting case. Again, they're a team that I'm not really completely sold on, and I really don't think is that good. They're, right now, again, sitting 1-3. They had a pretty solid, opening day performance against the Padres. They still wound up losing. But it was still really impressive to watch how well they came out and how strong they came out, especially when they were going up against Yu Darvish, right? We have to remember he was their opening day starter, and they really held their own. They wound up losing still, but they still held their own. Now, getting into some other numbers, Michael Brantley, he leads the MLB in doubles right now with 4. Yerman Mercedes, he leads the MLB in hits with 12. Gavin Lux, he leads the entire MLB in triples with 2. And then right behind him is his fellow teammate Cody Bellinger with 1. So, again, this is going to be a really dangerous Dodgers team. I think that people are probably very well aware of that. They're probably very in tune to that so far because, this team, they're stacked, right? They are stacked. They barely made any offseason moves, and they're already 4-1 to start the year. And, again, this is as of April 6th of recording, so things can change definitely. But I'm going to go through some teams that have actually started off pretty strong. Phillies are right now 4-0. And then if you look at the rest of the NL East, it's kind of interesting. They are really bad, right? Miami is sitting at 2nd and 1-3. Now, again, Washington has not played a game yet because they've had some COVID issues. They had their opening series matchup against the Mets canceled because of COVID, and then they had a game against the Braves canceled because of COVID, and they're going to do a doubleheader on Wednesday to take on the Braves, and the Braves are not off to a good start either. They're 0-3, the Mets are 0-1, but again, some of these teams, they have not played many games yet. Now, if you look at the NL Central, you're kind of scratching your head and saying, shouldn't that be the NL East? Because the Cubs are 3-1, the Reds are 3-1, the Cardinals are 2-2, and the Brewers are 1-3, and the Pirates are 1-3. So those are, and again, all those teams have had no issues with COVID or anything, so they've been off to strong starts. But in the NL West, we might have a little showdown on our hands once again. But this time, it might not include the Athletics, who are 0-5. They have the worst record in baseball right now, 0-5, the only team that has 0 wins through their first 5 games. But the Houston Astros and the Los Angeles Angels, they're fighting it out right now. Both are 4-1. The Mariners are 2-2. And I'm going to take a minute on this Mariners team. I really like this Mariners team. I really do. I don't know what it is about them. They're an interesting team for me because I think that they've got a lot of potential. They've got a lot of players that are going to be, I think, really good. You could look at a guy like Ty France, who I think is going to have a great career ahead of him. I know he's not batting well this year, only .231, but again, I think he's going to get out of that rut. He's got a .950 OPS, so clearly he's going to bring some power over at that third base corner. Evan White, again, another struggling season. He's somebody that is going to be, he needs to be that difference maker, right? Because they're going to have help from Kyle Seager for however long he's going to be there. They're going to have help from Ty France. They're going to have help from Kyle Lewis. But when you have Evan White there, another first-round draft pick that is batting below 200, you cannot have that. Okay, you cannot have that. Mitch Haniger is off to a strong start there, right fielder, batting .353, a big-time jump from his average last year, which was at a .220. So, but I will say, though, Haniger, he brings some power. He had 15 homers last year and 32 RBIs. He's got a home run and an RBI so far, and he's over 1,000 OPS. But I'm really curious about this Mariners team as a whole. I mean, they're a very interesting case, and I think that they're going to be maybe better than people think sooner rather than later. So I'm excited for the future in Seattle. But just running through a couple other stats before we get into our third segment, Jose Altuve actually is leading the MLB in runs right now with 9. And he's got a .381 average, so a big-time jump from his 2020 season. And again, let's look at it again this way, right? We can clearly start to see that there's some players that have had much better starts to this year than last year because they had a spring training. They had a normal start to the year. They had a normal beginning of the season, and things were, again, somewhat normal. But it was still more normal than it was last year when they were having summer training and then they were getting thrown into a 60-game season and so on and so forth. But now you look at a team like the Brewers and you have a team that really struggled hitting-wise, and Christian Yelich, he's continuing to struggle, batting .200. Their leading batter right now is Avisel Garcia at .231. This is exactly why they've struggled early on. And as a fan, it's very infuriating to see because this team, I think, is very good. I think they've got a lot of really good players, and they just haven't been able to perform. They haven't been able to put it together. Now, I know they've only played 4 games, and there's still 158 to go. So there's a lot of baseball to be played. And a lot of things can change, and I definitely think that is exactly what will happen. But that's just a couple players and then getting into some teams that have really jumped out to me early on and just some players and teams to really look for the rest of the season because I think that they could have really big impacts, bigger than people think. And not to mention, as the season continues to go on, you know, we're going to start seeing some of these younger players that we don't really know much about, like Ty France, or maybe a player like Jared Klinick from the Mariners, or maybe somebody like Bobby Witt from the Royals that, again, we don't know a whole lot about that's going to burst on the scene. And I'm excited to see guys like Juan Soto really play well this year, and Fernando Tatis suffering an injury the other night. Hopefully he's okay, but excited for him to play and get to see him and how much he can do. And hopefully his injury's not very serious. I mean, it looked, not great. He injured himself on his backswing when he was swinging, so hopefully his shoulder's all right. He's had some issues with his shoulder, but hopefully he can get back to full recovery sooner rather than later. But folks, that's going to close things out for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Once again, thanks for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I'll get into the milestones to keep track of during the season and which milestones could be broken quicker than others. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we've got a ton more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I got into discussing which players that have stuck out the most early on in the season and how they could keep this level of play up throughout the rest of the year. And I want to now dive into some milestones to pay very close attention to during the season that some players could actually achieve at one point or another. And there are actually more than you would think. I actually did not realize that there were this many milestones that are going to be potentially and in some cases actually could be very, very achievable for some players. So I'll get into the first milestone to keep an eye out for, and that's Miguel Cabrera. He's right now 12 home runs shy of 500 career home runs. Now, the likelihood of him breaking this year, I would assume, is very, very high. I mean, let's face it, right? The guy, yes, he's getting older. He is getting older, but he's still producing at a pretty decent rate. I mean, he had the first ever home run in the 2021 season this year, so that should tell you a lot of things right there. The guy can absolutely play without question, and he can play very, very late into his career, as we've already seen. He's 38 years old, and he's continuing to put up the numbers that he's putting up. Now, I will say his home run numbers have dipped down significantly since 2016. Since 2016, he's had 16 homers, 3 homers, 12 homers, and 10 homers, respectively, from 2017 to 2020 in each of those years. Now, I know that in some of those cases, there weren't as many games. For instance, in 2020, he only played in 57 games. In 2018, he only played in 38 games. So if he can play an entire season this year, I could definitely see him achieving this feat. I could definitely see him surpassing 500 career home runs. Now, how many more will he get after 500? I don't know. That's another question. And again, he's 38. He's going to be 39 next year. Is he going to actually keep playing, right? I mean, how much more does he actually have left in the tank? That is a question that we really have to ask ourselves. How much does Cabrera actually have left in him that he can continue to play at a decent level? Because it's clear the numbers and the production have dipped down since 2016. He's clearly not the same player. I mean, hey, let's face it. When your home runs pretty much half from one year to another, that tells you a lot of things, right? I mean, from 2016 to 2017, his home runs literally dropped by half, from 38 to 16. Now, the batting average has stayed pretty consistent for the most part. In 2018, although it was only 38 games he's played, he had a 299 average, and then 2019 had a 282 average, but then 2020 had a 250 average. And quite frankly, this year he's not hitting well at all. 154 average so far in only 4 games played. So I know it's a very small sample size, but it's not a great start. But nonetheless, it is a milestone to keep an eye out for because he could definitely achieve that this year. I personally think he could, especially if he homered on the first day of the season, right? That should say a lot of things right there, that he's on a really good, I would say, trend and a good pace moving forward throughout the rest of the year because, let's face it, they've got another 150-plus games to go, and I think he can hit 11 homers, 12 homers by then if he does play his cards right, and if he stays healthy too. So another player to keep an eye out for, Albert Pujols, as he's 83 hits shy of being ninth all-time on the hits list. Now, that's pretty impressive if you ask me. I do think he could achieve this. I definitely think that he could meet this feat, and not to mention, I mean, it's one of the many, many things that he's accomplished in his career, right? I mean, there's many, many things that he has literally done incredible things, right? I mean, he's won MVPs. He's been at the top of the league for years. He's been a consistent just massive power hitter, and he's just been so consistency has really been the main piece in his entire career, right? I mean, that's been kind of the big thing in his entire time as an MLB player, is that each and every single year he's been very, very steady throughout the duration of a season, really. You know, you look at his numbers and you see what he's done throughout, you know, year after year. I mean, from his rookie year all the way to 2010, he didn't have a season where he dipped under 30 home runs. He went from 37 home runs in his first year as a rookie to then all of a sudden in 2010, he had 42 home runs. And the year before that, in 2009, he had 47 home runs. So that tells you, again, that he has been at the top of the game for a very, very long time. And his home run numbers don't really dip down until you get into the mid-2010s or so. But the hits have been pretty consistent as well. Let's face it, after or before 2020, there wasn't a season that he dipped under 100 hits in the whole year. So that does tell me that he is capable of getting to that point and surpassing this milestone. And it would be an incredible thing to, again, add on to just his entire legacy as a player, right? I mean, he's literally one of the greatest players to ever have played baseball. And it's cool to see that, you know, Miguel Cabrera and Albert Pujols are both players that kind of came into the league around the same time, I would say, around the same general time frame. And they both kind of ascended at the same time, and they've both started to, unfortunately, decline at the same time. But they're two players that I think will always kind of, I don't want to say be each other's foils, but they kind of will, right? I mean, there'll always be, I think, comparisons between Cabrera and Pujols in this day and age and in this time and hit of baseball, because they were at the top of their game, and they were one of the best hitters in the league for years after years after years. And so that does say a lot of things, right? I mean, that says a lot of things when you're that consistent over a 10, 15-year period. So I definitely see Albert Pujols accomplishing this feat this year. I could definitely see him moving up on the list into ninth all-time. I could definitely see that he could get there, or at least get pretty close. I mean, if you look at, you know, who he's got to pass right now Paul Molitor, and then Carl Yastrzemski, and then seventh is Honus Wagner, Derek Jeter, and then it's Trice Speaker, Stan Musial, Hank Aaron, Ty Cobb, and the all-time hits leader in Pete Rose. So, again, and not to mention every single one of those players minus Pete Rose is a Hall of Famer. So I think we can all guess that Albert Pujols will be one of the greatest of all time, and he will go down as a great, and he will be in the Hall of Fame. There's no question about that. He will be in the Hall of Fame one day. So that is something to pay close attention to. 83 hits. He only needs 83 more hits to be ninth all-time on the list to pass Paul Molitor. So I'm going to get into the next one, and that is Max Scherzer reaching 216 Ks this year. If he does that, he will accomplish 3,000 career Ks in his entire career. Now, the likelihood of this happening, I think, is pretty solid, mainly because if you look at how well Max Scherzer has pitched over his entire career, it's been pretty impressive, right? I mean, he's rattled off a couple years where he's had some big-time strikeout numbers, you know, years where he's had 200-plus Ks. And, you know, looking at his numbers, 2018, so 3 years ago, he had 300 Ks. In 2019, he had 243 Ks. And from 2012 all the way to 2019, he had 200-plus Ks in each of those years. So minus the one truncated season because of the pandemic, quite frankly, he could have probably surpassed that milestone last year. He could be building onto that right now. He's right now sitting at 2,793 career strikeouts. So it's just going to be a matter of, can he stay healthy? Can Max Scherzer stay healthy? That's been the biggest thing right now, right? In his career, it's been kind of an issue, you know, for the last, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 years. 36 years old. He's been in the league for 14 years. He's had some arm problems. Nothing, I would say, major or drastic within the recent memory, at least. Nothing like his teammate in Steven Strasburg. But it's still been, I think, enough that it could maybe end his career before he gets to 216. Now, again, we'll have to see how he does this year. We'll have to see how he comes out of the truncated season that they are all coming out of, and how he's able to, you know, and if that'll affect him at all, right? I mean, again, it's kind of it's a big shock to the body that these players are having to go through right now. When you look at it and you see they've played maybe 15 games last year, or started 15, maybe 10 games last year as starting pitchers. Now this year they're going to have to triple that and go up to maybe 30 games that they're going to start. That's a big shock to the body. And some guys' bodies might not be able to take that toll, you know, day after day, and go through an 162-game season, and Scherzer is not getting any younger. So that's another thing to factor in. How will his age take a whole toll and really play a role in all of this? But I do think that he could get it. I could see him, eventually, if it's not this year, maybe next year, because I don't think he's going to retire anytime soon. I think, let's face it, there's counterparts of his in the MLB that are pitching into close to their 40s. And if he's 36, he still has a good 2 or 3 years left in him. And I think that he's going to eventually get to over 3,000 career Ks. And I think that he's going to be, again, he's going to be someone that goes down in the Hall of Fame, no question, like Albert Pujols, like Miguel Cabrera. I mean, 3-time Cy Young winner, 7-time All-Star, a World Series champion. I mean, that's a resume. I mean, that's Hall of Fame resume, if you ask me. I mean, that's really an impressive thing. But again, he only started in 1 game last year. So he's coming off a year where he was injury-ridden, and so that might affect whether or not he gets to that milestone this year. But I think in the next couple years and in the coming seasons, he could definitely accomplish that feat at some point or another. So I would say the likelihood is solid, but not incredibly high. That's the one thing that I would pay close attention to. But then the next milestone to pay very close attention to is Jon Lester. He's 7 wins shy of reaching 200 career wins. Now, I think that this is a pretty high likelihood that he could break that. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee. I'm not saying that he won't, but I do think that it is a very, very likely thing. It's just a matter of, again, can he stay healthy? The big thing with all 4 of these players is Miguel Cabrera and Albert Pujols are getting older, so can they continue to perform and produce at a high level and not allow their age and just their longevity start to play a negative factor into their careers and start to really take a toll on their bodies? And then Max Scherzer and Jon Lester, it's really a matter of, okay, are they going to stay healthy? Are they going to be healthy the entirety of the season? And if you look at Jon Lester's numbers over the years and the wins that he's had 4 straight years of double-digit wins. So from 2015 to 2019, he had 11-plus wins in each of those seasons. He had 18, which was a career high for him in 2018. So he's only 2-3 years removed from that. So I do think Lester could eventually get to that 7-win mark. He was 3-3 last year. He started in 12 games, and he has had some injury problems, but not many. I would not say nearly as many as Scherzer has, or at least not as many as Strasburg's had. I mean, Scherzer hasn't had as many, but he's definitely had more than Jon Lester, that's for sure. But Jon Lester, I think, can definitely get to 7 wins. And I think that's very, very attainable. It's, again, just a matter of him staying healthy. And also, if his team is going to produce, right? If his team is going to put up the numbers that they need to put up and give him the run support that he needs in order to be successful and to reach that milestone. So it's going to be a lot of factors for the Nationals. And honestly, the Nationals aren't off to the greatest start right now. So that's another thing that could have played a big factor in not only, Lester, but also Scherzer. More so for Lester because he has to rely on wins for this milestone as opposed to Scherzer, which is all kind of in his control with strikeouts. But I definitely think that Lester will eventually get to that mark, and he will surpass 200 career wins. But then the final milestone to pay very close attention to, Aroldis Chapman. He is 24 saves shy of 300 career saves. Aroldis Chapman, again, he's somebody that, I think we might forget how old he's getting, right? I mean, he's 33 years old. I mean, he still has time. He still has lots of time. I mean, 12 years in the MLB. He's a 6-time All-Star, so he's been an All-Star half the time he's been in the MLB. He's been a World Series champion. I think that he can get there. I definitely think that. And if you look at his numbers, he's had years where he's had 38 saves, and then it gets to 36 saves and 32 saves, 37 saves. 2019, he had his second most amount of saves in a career, or in a season for his career, at 37. The most was 38 in 2012. And again, he's not that far removed from that. A lot of these guys, and I know the pandemic has probably put a lot of players and a lot of people a couple steps behind, if you will, right? They're not playing at the level that they were playing beforehand. Everybody's kind of out of whack, and everybody's trying to get back into the rhythm of things. And so I could see, again, very similar to how Lester and Scherzer could run into these issues, Chapman running into these issues where he's coming off a year where he pitched literally 1 inning for the Yankees, and then now he might have to pitch, 50-plus innings, 60-plus innings this season, and his arm might not be completely ready. He's had time to get ready, though. They've had a spring training, they've had an off-season, they've had this, that, and the other, and so it should not be that big of an issue, but you never know, right? I mean, you never know, and injuries are a weird thing, but that's another milestone to pay very close attention to. I think it's very likely that he will get there because of just how good the Yankees are, right? I mean, that's kind of the main factor in all of this is just how good the Yankees are and how, talented of a team they are, right? And that's something to really pay attention to is how well they are this year, and if they put Chapman in those situations to be successful, but to also come out and get the saves and reach that milestone. 300 career saves is a pretty incredible thing. And Chapman, he's definitely one of the top closers in the last 10 years. So it is very, very accurate, and I would say very, very, justifying that he's going to be achieving this feat because of how well and how good he's been playing throughout his entire career. So, folks, that's going to do it for us in this third segment, but thanks for sticking around as always. But stay right there because we'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll get into which teams that are projected to finish in second place in their respective divisions or even lower could actually wind up winning and being the underdog stories this season. Folks, don't go anywhere because we've got one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I got right into discussing what milestones are close to being broken by some players this year and how likely some of these players are to break these records this year, and if not this year, then maybe next season. But I want to close out the show today with a little prediction of which teams that are projected to finish in second or even lower that could actually make a run for the division and what divisions they are in. So I'm going to rattle off a couple teams, and then I'm going to mention which teams or which teams are kind of their biggest competition, which teams are their second biggest competition, and what are the real likelihoods of these teams actually winning their respective divisions. So the first team I want to get into is the Toronto Blue Jays. I could see the Toronto Blue Jays potentially winning the AL East. I really could. And their main competition, without question, is the Yankees. There's no debating that. The Yankees are their first top priority of any sort of competition. The Rays would be a close second. I don't know what to think of the Red Sox. The Red Sox have not been off to a great start. The Orioles are kind of iffy right now. And so again, I don't really know what to think of this AL East. If you're looking at the standings, again, as of today on April 7th, the Yankees and the Orioles are actually tied for first. So the Orioles have been off to a better start, and the Yankees and the Blue Jays are both 3-2 as well. The Rays and the Sox are 2-3. So it's a pretty even division right now, right? It's pretty even across the board. But I think the Blue Jays can win. I was very impressed with just how well they played on opening day against the Yankees, how they seemed to hold their own. They were in a couple jams, they were in a couple situations, and their bullpen actually bailed them out a couple times. And I remember going into the year, and I've even said this before on the show, really curious to see what their starting rotation is going to be like after Hyun-Jin Ryu. What are they going to have after him? Are they going to have any help after him? Do they have any depth? And they really don't. You look at that team and you really don't see anybody else on that team starting pitching-wise that's going to do anything special for you. And so having their bullpen step up the way it did was crucial, and I think it's going to be vital for them for the rest of the year because, let's face it, I don't think the Rays are going to put up the fight that a lot of people think that they will. I think the Rays are going to have a little bit of a down year, and I think the Red Sox are maybe another year away from being back to where they were before. Now, the Yankees, though, on the other hand, they're going to be good. There's no question about that. The Yankees are going to be a really good team. And it's really a matter of, I think it might come down to, because the Blue Jays hitting, I think, is not necessarily comparable to the Yankees, but they do have a lot of options. And they do have a lot of players that can hit, and they can hit for power, and they can be very, very consistent and productive from the plate. It's going to really come down to a battle of how can the starting pitching hold up for both teams throughout the year? Because the Yankees have a lot of question marks surrounding their starting rotation. You've got two guys that they've picked up in the offseason that have really had, I would say, injury-ridden reputations the last 2 years in Jameson Taillon and Corey Kluber. And so that makes you wonder, okay, what's their rotation going to be like, right? What's their rotation going to be like after Garrett Cole, from Cole to Cole, from Hyun-Jin Ryu to Hyun-Jin Ryu? What is the Blue Jays rotation going to look like? So that's going to be the big question mark because, quite frankly, the bullpens held their own. I mean, I've only watched the one game that they played on ESPN, the Blue Jays and the Yankees, but I was really impressed with just how well both teams held their own with their bullpens and how composed their bullpens were, too. That was another thing. Just they were so cool, calm, and collected. They had one bases-loaded jam, and they got themselves out of it. And so I think this Blue Jays team could really win this division, and it's just going to really be a matter of can they beat out the Yankees. I think that's going to be their main priority. Can they beat out the Yankees? So that's for the AL East. Now, I want to get into the AL West because I think the Angels could definitely win the division. Right now, the Astros, they're off to a great start. They're 5-1. The Angels are second at 4-2. And I think that now looking at my notes and saying that the A's are their first top priority in terms of competition, I don't know, because the A's right now are 0-6. They have not won a game yet. They are the only winless ball club other than the Braves in the MLB right now. So maybe not so much the A's, but actually the Astros. The Angels and the Astros, this would be kind of an interesting back and forth, if you will. And the Astros seem to have kind of picked up where they left off back in 2019. 2020 seems to be a season where they want to forget, and now they're kind of back to the swing of things and back to their normal selves for the most part. So I'm really curious to see how the Angels will hold their own. The Angels have done a lot of wonderful things, I think, in the offseason the last 2 years. They go out and get Anthony Rendon 2 years ago. Now they get Jose Iglesias. They go out and get some good pitching, Alex Cobb, Dylan Bundy, and they get, a lot of other pieces. They get a lot of other pieces around them that I think can really benefit their long-term, success, if you will. I really do see that because the Angels, they're a team that I think it's a long time coming for them. They've been, I think, knocking at the door or trying to knock at the door for the last few years. They haven't been able to put it together. Mike Trout is probably itching to get back to the playoffs. I mean, let's face it, he's one of the greatest athletes ever to be on one of the worst teams ever. No question about it. I mean, I'm talking about in all sports, right? I mean, he is one of the greatest ever to be on a team that is consistently bad year after year. And so I hope that the Angels can win the AL West, really for his sake, so he can get to the playoffs and he can really shine on a platform and a spotlight that other people have not been able to accomplish quite yet, maybe in their career. So I definitely see the Angels making a run for the AL West and winning it there. And then another team to really pay attention to that, again, they're struggling right now, but I could definitely see them picking it up eventually, the Brewers. I could see them winning the division. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, you're a Brewers fan. Yes, I am a Brewers fan. But if you look at their off-season moves, they actually made more beneficial moves for themselves than I think other teams in that division did. The Cardinals made one ginormous move, and that was it. They didn't do anything else. The Brewers went out and they did a couple good, solid moves that I think are going to carry them a little bit further into the year. Now, their biggest competition will be the Cardinals, no question about it. The Reds, though, however, they're sitting at first place right now in the NL Central, so I think the Reds might also be another team to watch. I mean, I've got them actually written on my list as a couple other teams. Really, this division is up for grabs. I really do think this division's up for grabs. I think the Brewers could win it, I think the Cubs could win it, and I think the Reds could win it. I think, again, all three of those teams, their biggest competition will be each other and the Cardinals. The Cardinals are probably the favorite to win it all, right? They're probably the favorites to win the NL Central, but I could see the Brewers, if they are able to put things together. Their problem right now is their hitting. Their best hitter right now is Avisel Garcia, and he's batting .231. You cannot win baseball games and go to the playoffs with a team that has their leading batter batting .231. And I know it's very early on in the year. But again, these games early on, they will start to mount up and count later on in the year as we get into the playoffs, and they'll look back and say, man, we dropped those 3 of 4, we dropped those 2 of 3 earlier on in the year back in April and May. That's really set us back, and now we're kind of having to scramble. And the Brewers are a really good team towards the latter part of the season. A couple times, last 2 or 3 years, they've gone on incredible stretches where they win 20 of 30 games or they win 18 of 25 games, and all of a sudden they put themselves into a playoff position. So that's why I think the Brewers could definitely win the NL Central, and they could actually beat out the Cardinals, because I think that they've got the durability to last them the entire year. I don't know if the Cardinals necessarily have a lot of depth that they can go to. They do have a lot of big-time names and a lot of superstar power, but after that it's kind of like, well, what else do you have to offer? Not saying that the Brewers have a ton more to offer, but I think that they do have a little bit of a deeper roster. But for the Cubs and the Reds, I think the Cubs could definitely make some noise. I definitely think that. I mean, they're sitting in second right now in the NL Central, and I think that the Cubs could definitely make a run for the division, mainly because I think that this is kind of, again, and I've said this a million times, this is the last hurrah for the Cubs. This is the last hurrah, and I think that the Astros might be in the same boat as them. Both teams are kind of in this last hurrah mode where it's either we keep winning and we continue to build with this team, or we lose, we start trading pieces and getting, incentives back for these players that are really talented that we can maybe get some trade value for, and we'll just have to start rebuilding. It's one of those two options. There's no gray area. It's black or white. And so that's kind of why I think that the Cubs and the Reds, this is especially the Cubs, this is their last-ditch effort to really make a run for winning the NL Central. And again, the Brewers, the Reds, and the Cardinals will be their biggest competition. And for the Reds, I think they're just trying to prove people wrong, right? I think that they're just trying to prove people wrong. I think a lot of people were very, very disappointed in how they played last year. I mean, me personally, I was very disappointed in them. And so I think that this year they've got a lot to prove. They want to come out swinging. They clearly have started to come out swinging, mainly because of the fact that, I mean, the first 5 games, they've won 4 of them. They're on a 4-game winning streak after dropping their first game of the season. So that, again, tells you a lot of things about this team. And not to mention, Nick Castellanos, I think that he's going to be a guy that winds up thriving in Cincinnati. I think he needed to be on a team that was, going to be in a good division, or at least a solid division somewhat. I know that last year the NL Central was not very good, but I think this year they'll be a little bit better. But he needed to be in a place where he was going to get a little bit more media coverage, and he was going to be the main focal point too. And I just felt like when he was in Detroit, it was really the Miguel Cabrera show, and people were kind of like, yeah, they've got this other guy named Nick Castellanos who's pretty good. But now he's with the Reds, and I think that people should pay much more attention to him. They kept a lot of the pitchers that they were potentially going to shop around in free agency and trade, like Sonny Gray and Luis Castillo, and I think that was very important for them as well, because although they probably would have gotten a lot for them, I think that they kind of went into this season with the idea of, you know what, we've still got a lot of the guys that we had from last year. We still made the playoffs, just barely, but we still made the playoffs. We need to keep this momentum going. There's no point of pulling the rug out from underneath and trying to start all over again. There's just literally no point of that. And so I think that the Reds are going to definitely make a big-time push for the NL Central crown, and really, I think, could potentially win the division. But again, it's very early on, so a lot of things can happen. So we'll have to see. But those are 3 other teams that I could see, again, all within the division, all being the ones that wind up winning it over the Cardinals. Because the Cardinals, they'll be the favorites. They get old Nolan Arenado, and as a result, it's kind of this I guess, obvious idea that they're going to automatically win. Well, that was not necessarily the case in Colorado with the Rockies. So what does it say, or what makes people think that that's going to carry over into St. Louis? I know that the Rockies are in a very difficult division with the Dodgers and the Padres, but I mean the Cardinals still have, I think, a lot of other players that they can that stack up pretty well against other players in the division on other teams. I think Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt, and they kind of stick out, but everyone else, again, kind of just levels the playing field, if you will. So getting into these 2 other teams that I want to discuss that I think could definitely win their division is the White Sox, without question. I know that everybody has the Twins projected to win. A lot of people have the White Sox coming in at second, mainly because of the Eloy Jimenez injury. Well, with the stepping up of Yerman Mercedes, that's really started to change things a little bit for them, right? I mean, that's really started to change things for them a little bit because he's been off to a great start this year. He's the first player in MLB history to ever have a hit in each of his first 8 at-bats. So that, again, tells you a lot of things about how good of a player he is. But not to mention, the White Sox made a lot of nice moves over the offseason. I love that they went and got Lance Lynn. I love that they have Liam Hendricks. I know that the Twins, they've done a lot of upgrades themselves. Andrelton Simmons over at short. They brought back Nelson Cruz, who's still hitting at a very, very high clip. They've got back a lot of pieces for their bullpen that they needed, especially with the bullpen being, as good as it was last year. And I think that, and not to mention, Jose Barrios is finally pitching well, so he's starting to show that he can be an ace-caliber pitcher. Kenta Maeda is continuing to be, I think, the ace for that team. So you've got two players that are, one that's an ace-caliber player, and the other one is an ace pitcher. I mean, that's going to do a lot of things for you. I think that's going to do a lot of things for the Twins, no question. But for the White Sox, I just think they have so much more firepower hitting-wise. Yoan Moncada, Nick Madrigal, Luis Robert, Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu, right? I mean, the list goes on. Yerman Mercedes now. When Eloy Jimenez gets back, that's 7 guys right there that can legitimately hit in their lineup and in their rotation. Not to mention you bring in veteran bats like Adam Eaton, a smart player, a good defender, somebody to really anchor that outfield defense. I like where the White Sox are going. Now, another team that could maybe put up a little bit of a fight is the Royals. The Royals are right now first place. They're 3-1 right now in the AL Central. They're off to a great start. I mean, again, I was somewhat high up on this team in the offseason, and then I kind of started to realize, well, do they really have what it takes to go that far? Do they really have what it takes to be that good? Well, Michael A. Taylor has stepped up to the plate, and he's stepped up to the challenge. He's played really well. Whit Merrifield has also been playing very well. So they've had a lot of guys step up, and they added a lot of pieces. And so I definitely could see the Royals giving a little bit of competition towards not only the White Sox, but also the Twins, right? I think the Twins could be a team that is going to be challenged a little bit from teams that they don't really expect. I think the Twins might think, okay, we only have to really worry about the White Sox because, quite frankly, I don't think the Indians are going to be good, and I don't think the Tigers are going to be good. I think the Tigers are going to fizzle out at some point. They're right now tied for second in the division with the Minnesota Twins, but I don't think that they're going to keep that level of play up throughout the rest of the year. I just really don't think they have it in them. So it's going to be a matter of can the White Sox, make do without Eloy Jimenez? Can they start to step up their level of play? And will they be challenged by the Royals? What kind of factor will the Royals play in this division? Because they could really push the Twins and the White Sox down the road, and especially down the stretch as we get later into the season. So then another team that, this might be an obvious one, this might not be, but that I think could win the division that is projected to be in second place is the Padres. And I've said this before. I think the Padres could definitely win the division. I really do think that. And I know the Dodgers are this high and mighty team, and rightfully so. I mean, they're 5-1 right now, and the Padres are sitting at 4-2 and second in the division. And like I figured, they're not going to have much competition, right? I mean, the rest of their division has a losing record right now. The Diamondbacks are 2-3, the Giants are 2-3, and the Rockies are 1-4. So they're not going to really be pushed by anybody else. The Dodgers and the Padres are going to be the most interesting 1-2 battle in the entire MLB because it's the only real legitimate 1-2 battle, I would say, in the entire MLB. I mean, if you look at the rest of the divisions, I don't think that there's either two teams that are just going to go at it with no other competition, or there's divisions where there's 3 teams that could win it, or even 4 teams that could win it, in cases like the NL East where there's a lot of teams that could actually win it. I know that some of the teams are not off to great starts, had some COVID issues, so that's definitely going to set some things back. But the Padres could really push the Dodgers because I think the Padres, now they've got somewhat of an evenly comparable roster to the Dodgers, right, in terms of how much talent they have, how much depth they have. Sure, the Dodgers have 3 Cy Young winners on their pitching staff. Yes, the Dodgers do have, MVP winners in 2018 and 2019 on their roster. Yeah, they have some really glamorous players that are really, really good, but the Padres also have some great players themselves. The one caveat is with Fernando Tatis being injured and dislocating his shoulder, that's going to play a factor one way or another. How is it going to play a factor? No idea, but it's going to play a factor. Now, the good thing is for the Padres is that they've got a lot of players that can step up and that can fill that void somewhat, but at the same time, how is his absence from the lineup going to affect the team, and how long will his absence be also? Because if it's something that continues to nag him throughout the entire season, this could be a real issue for the Padres down the stretch. But I definitely think that they've got the talent, not to mention they've made the pitching adds that they needed to make to really be competitive, and so I definitely think the Padres could wind up beating the Dodgers and winning the NL West. So those are my kind of teams that I could be very, very, not really that shocked, if you will, if they win their divisions and they're being projected lower than they are because, again, I think that they're being underestimated, some underestimated teams, if you will. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. As always, thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review. That really helps us. And also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd also really appreciate that. And thank you again, as always, for listening. And until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.